And now what I'd like to do is talk to you a bit about the astronomy and the geometry there. This plan was made by, what was his name? John Woods in the 18th century, a plan of Stonehenge. And what we can clearly see is that there were 30 openings. If you take this initial model, as I said at the beginning, then you have 30 openings around it. And so it's often seen here that the circle was divided into 30. But in fact, you have openings and closed bits, right? So if you look at this, you have an opening and a closed bit, then an opening and a closed bit. So the circle is in fact divided into 60, just like we saw in the outer circle at Woodhenge. And as I just said, 60 is a very important number because it seems to be the ancient principle of division of time and the circle. So the stuff comes from the ancient Sumerians, the division of the day into 24 hours and then 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute. And the same for the circle. You have 360 degrees and then 60 minutes in a degree and 60 seconds in a minute. So circular geometry and time are divided using this 60-base system. And we use it today. If you look at your watch and the big hand is pointing to the number 7, and I say, what time is it? You'll say it's 25 to, right? How do you get from 7 to 25? You see, we use the 60-base system without thinking about it. It's, you know, it's very interesting to see how we can actually use systems, complex systems, if we know them when we're young. So it's very interesting to think that when you learn about where the division of the circle into 60 comes from, today it will always be said that it comes from the ancient Sumerians. And nobody will say that in Great Britain, in 2000 BC, the division of the circle into 60 was already known. That's a very strange fact, because we should talk about this, really. You know, how come these ancient Britons were using the same system as the Sumerians? Anyway, the division of the circle into 60. Now, this makes it a clock. The sun goes round in 24 hours. Everybody knows that. It is a circle around in 24 hours. It comes back to the south midday every 24 hours. And even we can't see it when it's under the horizon, but it does actually go to the north. If you go to the North Pole, then you can watch the circle in summer. You can watch the sun do the whole circle. And here, because of the latitude, where it goes under the horizon a bit to the north. But it goes all the way around in 24 hours, which means that at Stonehenge, it will do 60 over 24 segments per hour, which is 2.5. So every hour, the sun does 2.5 segments of Stonehenge. A segment being full part, empty part, full part, okay? So if you're standing in the middle, then you can see it do an hour. You can watch the sun moving around, and you can follow the time it's doing. So it does one segment in 24 minutes. Now let's look at the calendar thing. So if we come to summer solstice, the sun is visible in 43 segments, and it's hidden, in other words, under the ground, it's nighttime, for 17 segments. So the day lasts 24 minutes times 43, which is 17 hours and 12 minutes. So at Stonehenge, at the latitude, the day at summer solstice lasts that long. There it is. That's the summer solstice sunrise and the summer solstice sunset. SSSSS. Okay? And then if you come to winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, Well, this is the opposite. The sun will be visible for 17 segments and hidden for 43 segments, which means that the day will last 17 times 40, 24 minutes, 6 hours and 48 minutes, which is short. No? But that's winter solstice at this latitude. And there's that bit, okay? So if you're standing in the center of Stonehenge, you can quite clearly use the arches and the holes as a clock. You can also follow the moon. This is less known fact. The moon goes round in 24 hours, 24.878 hours. It doesn't go round in 24 hours. That's why tides are later every day. People who live by the sea know that tide is 52 minutes later every day. It's because the moon takes longer to go round, because it has its own movement and it's sort of moving up. So anyway, the moon goes round on the circle at that time, which means it does one segment in a 60th of that. In other words, 24.878 minutes. So on the day of maximum moon, as I was talking about, every 18.6 years, when the moon will rise the furthest towards the north and set the furthest towards the north, it will be visible in 46.5 segments and hidden in 35. Let's go through the calculations. The moon will be in the sky for 19 hours and 17 minutes. So that's quite an event. You can imagine after 18.5 years, that's an important event for people to witness, is this incredible moon, and that's where it comes right up in the sky, almost vertical, because it rises so far north that it goes right up very high before then it then comes down. And there is writing about this. The Romans wrote about the Druids who had the temple of Apollo, the circular temple of Apollo, and every 19 years they said Apollo would come and they would dance in a circle. So there's actually traces of this. Anyway, there's the cycle of the moon in 2025. Now let's look at the dimensions a little, if it's not too late, if you can handle this. This is the oldest, very precise plan of Stonehenge made by John Wood in 1740. He measured this to the sort of 1/4 of an inch, and he measured even the little notches and grooves. You can see all these measurements on here. He measured the size of each side of each stone and how each stone was related to each other stone. He was considered to be mad by doing this plan. But of course, today it's very, very, very useful, because Stonehenge was in a more complete state when John Wood did his plans than it is now. Yeah. And another man here called Flinders Petrie, who's known for his measurements of the Great Pyramid. He did the plans and descriptions of Stonehenge in 1880, and he was a very, very precise man, you know, sort of maniac, sort of type precise, you know, madman sort of thing. And anyway, the measurements given, Stukely in 1740 said that the Sarsen circle diameter was 104 feet. And then Petrie, the man we've just seen, with much better material in 1880, he gave the dimensions of the inner diameter of 97.325 feet, 29.665 meters, with a maximum error of 0.72 inches. Which is quite precise, you know, that's 1.5 centimeters or 7/10 of an inch. That's the precision of the inner diameter here. Now the width of the lintel stone, because the inner diameter doesn't count the width of the lintel stone, and the width of lintel stone was given by Atkinson in agreement with what Petrie had said as 3.5 feet. I'm always a bit wary when I see exact things like 3.5 feet. You know, one could imagine it would be 3.517 or 3.5 is So I'm not sure about the exact precision of this, but the two men gave the same dimension, Petrie and Atkinson. If this is the case, that means that if you take two lintel widths, okay, because to go from the inner diameter to the outer diameter, you have to add on the width of two lintels. That is 7 feet. 7 is an important number, and if this is really precisely 7 feet, added on to the circumference of to the diameter of a circle, then that can have specific meaning and can indicate that the foot length was actually used here. Okay? Yeah. It has specific, the number 7 has specific meaning on a circle, because to get from the length of the diameter to the circumference, we go via a constant called pi. Everybody knows about this, and it's one of these numbers that never ends. You don't know exactly how much it is. And there's an approximation of pi, which is 22 over 7, which is 3.1428 instead of 3.1416. But it's an approximation, a whole number approximation of 22 over 7. So if you multiply, say you have a radius of 7 on a circle, if you multiply that by 22 divided by 7, then you get the whole number on the circumference, 22. Okay? So the idea of having a measurement in 7 on a circle is an interesting idea, because it then gives you whole number measurements on the circumference. And that's very important when you're measuring distances, because very often distances are measured with wheels. If you want to measure a long distance, that's what the Romans did. Yeah. They have a cart, they know exactly the dimension of the wheel, and then they count the number of times the wheel turns. They have a cog system inside which counts the number of times the wheel, and so they know how far it is from one place to another. But to know that, you have to know the exact dimension of the wheel. Okay, so the size of a circle in whole numbers is a very useful thing to have. Okay, so that's a sort of, you know, just to one side. But anyway, to come to the output of all this is that the exterior diameter then is 29.665, more or less 1.5 centimeters, or 3 centimeters if you add the two lintel things, which gives us, plus the two lintels, which gives us a measurement in meters of 31.8, 31.799, 31.8 meters, or 104.327 feet. So 31.8 meters is the outside, the diameter of the exterior part of the circle. Does what 31.8 mean anything to you? No, not really. It's very interesting, because if you multiply 31.83 by pi, it's exactly 100. Which means that the outer diameter, the outer circumference of Stonehenge is 100 meters. Isn't that strange? Now, what is the meter length? Everybody learns at school that the meter length was introduced by, after the French Revolution, by Napoleon and his friends. And they got it from measuring part of the Earth, because the meter length is linked to the size of the Earth. It is defined as the 10 millionth part of the distance between the North Pole and the equator. So you take the distance from the North Pole to the equator, you divide by 10 million, and you get the meter. So in fact, it's a measurement that could exist in the past, because the size of the Earth is a constant reference. And what's very interesting, I've done a lot of work about this, it's very difficult to try and suggest to people that the meter length is much, much older than the French Revolution, because there's very fixed ideas about this. But you have to realize that after the French Revolution, Napoleon and 35,000 soldiers moved into Egypt. They fought in Egypt, and they then started taking the sand away from the base of the Great Pyramid. I've always thought that was a fairly weird thing to do just after a revolution, you know? And it's shortly after that time that they introduced the meter length. This is another subject, but I'm quite convinced that the meter length is a much older measurement. I think it was one of the most secret measurements that existed. And at the French Revolution, they made it a sort of international measurement as a kind of, you know, a way of getting at all the secret societies and all the things that existed, you know. Anyway, that's another story. But the fact is that the circumference of Stonehenge, the outer circumference of Stonehenge, measures 100 meters. And often when the meter length is presented, it's presented like this as a meter length. You know, you have a straight line. That's not a very good idea, because if a bit falls off the end or there's a bit missing, then the measurement is wrong. Whereas if you put the measurement on a circle, then you can take out whole bits of the circle. You only need to have three points remaining to be able to retrace the circle and find the measurement. So it's much more intelligent. If you want to incorporate the meter length, if you want to preserve the meter length, it's much more intelligent to do it in a circle than in a straight line. Anyway. So this is precise to 99.9% with the measurements given by Petrie. So could the lintel circle be a repository of the meter length and thus the size of the Earth? Because if the meter length is inscribed and the meter comes from the size of the Earth, then the size of the Earth is incorporated here. Here's Google Earth satellite image, and you can see here I've taken the exact measurement of 31.83 meters. That's the measurement of the yellow line, 31.83 meters across. And you can see it goes from the outside of one lintel to the outside of the other. But of course, you know, that's not 100% precise, but it's just showing you the relationship. And here as well, between these two lintels, there are only 18 centimeters difference in height. So that's another incredible fact, is that this circle was perfectly horizontal. Now, there's another circle around Stonehenge, the Aubrey holes. I talked about them earlier. You can see them here. Here they've been filled with something to make them visible. You can see there are two big ones and then two smaller ones. So you have two smaller ones, a big one, two smaller ones, a big one. All right? Now, that's a very interesting fact. And what I'd like to look at now is what I suggested earlier, is how do you divide a circle into 56? Now, there are different ways of doing this, but I'd like to suggest a way which is using a rectangle which has sides of 7 by 20. So you make a rectangle, 7 by 20, and you place the diagonal from the center to the exterior of your circle, okay? Like that. And then once you've done that, you move it. You move the thing onto the diagonal, and then you fix the center of your next hole. Then you move along to the diagonal of that, and you fix the next hole. So you just turn this thing around a corner here, fixed on a corner, and you turn it round, and every time from one hole to the next. And if you do that with this square of that dimension, right, let's accelerate. When you get back to here, you'll have one extra hole. Okay, so instead of coming back to exactly where you started from, you move on 1/3. So then you go round again, and again, and then you've got your 56 holes. Okay? Yeah. Now let's look at the precision of that. forget the geometry, but it's just to say that the angle there involved between this rectangle and its diagonal is 19.29 degrees. If you multiply that by 56, because there are 56 times that angle, that gives you 1080 degrees. And as we went round the circle 3 times, you have to divide that by 3, which gives you 360.08 degrees. So that's a virtually perfect way of dividing a circle into 56. All right? The question is that how they did it? It's not because you can do it like that they did it like that. So I was wondering if I could find any kind of proof that was how they did it. And the idea that came into my mind was, well, is there a measurement? Can we find a measurement involved here? I've just used numbers, 7 by 20. But what exactly are the measurements? So if you take the radius of the circle in units, a bit of Pythagoras here, 7 and 20 to get the size of the diagonal, it's the square root of the square of 1 plus the square root of the other. Remember that, Pythagoras theory? If you don't, just zap to the result, which is the square root of 449, which is 21.19. So in other words, if you have 7 by 20, the diagonal measures 21.19 units, which is the radius of the circle. So the diameter of the circle is twice that, 42.38 units. So if we can find out exactly what the diameter of this Aubrey circle is, then we can find out what this unit is. Okay?